Well, I went on quite a lot yesterday about George's pole lap and how well he drove that lap, how well Mercedes put it all together. But I cast doubt on whether I thought George could continue that, to drive that way, that sort of Senna-like way throughout the race, and that I felt that the tyre management window would favour Max and Red Bull more than it would George and Mercedes over a race distance. Well, I was completely wrong about that, so I put my hand up and admit that. But I would say there is a mitigating circumstance, because never in a million years did I imagine that Red Bull would start Max on the soft tyre. I'm still trying to get my head around why they would have done that. Yes, it rained earlier in the day, so there was a little bit of dampness in the track. Maybe the track was a little bit green, but by the time the race started, the track was bone dry. There was no reason to be thinking that there were any damp patches out there. And then beyond that, there was the calculation itself. The only reason for running the soft tyre off the line would be if you had a reasonable chance, if everybody else around you was on mediums, to get in front of them before the first corner. But bear in mind, in Singapore, there's a normal 8 metres between the lines on the grid, so Max is starting 8 metres behind George Russell. He's on the dirty side of the grid. And Pirelli put out a graphic before the race which said that the difference between the medium and the soft off the line was 1.96 metres, which is not very much. Bear in mind the difference between the medium and the hard. If somebody had started on the hard, the difference would have been 4.28 metres in terms of the grip difference between the two tyres. So 1.96 is not a lot. And then you look at the distance from the front of the grid to the braking area of the first corner, and it is approximately 6 seconds. So here was the ask for Max Verstappen going into that race. From the dirty side of the grid, admittedly on the soft tyre, 1.96 metre advantage, he was going to have to get past George, or at least alongside George, in under 6 seconds. Well, he made a reasonable start from the dirty side of the grid. He filled into P2, but from then it was all over, because then he was on the soft tyre, and the only way he could then run the race would be to try to extend his soft tyre stint as long as possible, try to look after the tyres as much as he could, and then switch to the hards, probably earlier than his nearest opposition. And that's exactly what happened. He did a very good job given those circumstances, but I cannot understand why they tied Max up that way. Had he started on the mediums, in other words on an even footing with George and been P2 into the first corner, he would have been able to take the race to George. I'm not saying he would have beaten him, but he certainly would have been able to take the race to him and maybe push him into a mistake or two. Had he got the lead on the soft tyres, the evidence is that it wouldn't have lasted anyway, because the soft tyres actually went off quite quickly after about 15 laps. And had George been right behind him on the medium, which I think he would have been, he would have just DRS past him and won the race anyway. So I don't understand it. To me, this was a Red Bull strategy decision, which, was it worse? No, it's got to be up there with the decision to put him on the hard tyre at the restart at the Spanish Grand Prix this year, when they had some softs in the garage, admittedly used softs, but they had track position, and Max isn't the easiest guy to overtake, even when he hasn't got much grip. But they put him on the hard tyre, and he finished wherever he finished, 7th or something in that race. And I think the decision was up there as well. I cannot imagine what they were thinking, to have a very good car on the medium tyre with very good tyre management to start him that way. Anyway, I don't want to detract, again, a bit like the qualifying video, I don't want to detract from the drive of George Russell, because A, it was unbelievably hot. We're talking nearly 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 31 degrees centigrade around there. Very, very hot conditions. Not much air either. I mean, just a really, really tough, difficult race. And George not only made a clean start, but he then drove pretty much perfectly throughout to win that race going away. With margin, he could make the odd small mistake under braking or do this or that. Drove absolutely superbly. I talked about the difference between George and Antonelli going into turn 1 yesterday. Of course, on full tanks, it didn't show up anything like as much, because just about everybody was having to go down to third, even for the first part of turn 1. But I thought it was quite interesting when Max was within about 2 seconds of George, relatively early in the race, on the soft tyre, George on the medium, just before the softs had really started to go off. And they said to Max, the real place where George is getting away from you, Max, is turn 1. I thought I had to smile when I heard that, because that's where George was very, very good. Sector 3, Max was always excellent. But yeah, George Russell, what a drive. And all credit to Mercedes. And we could say other things in this Grand Prix, like Red Bull beat McLaren around Singapore. That's quite a big deal. Ferrari were nowhere. But for Mercedes to come really from nowhere as well, and to have a car that good that George Russell maximised from start to finish was outstanding. And where that takes us now in terms of upcoming races, it'll be interesting to see how Mercedes get on at Austin. I mean, George said after the race that if he'd done a list of Grand Prix that he was least likely to win in 2025, Singapore probably would have been at the top, given the characteristics of the car. But I have said, and a lot, not only I, but many people have said this, at this last year of this Formula One regulation, we are going to get teams coming into the performance window for no apparent reason and just going really, really quickly. We've seen it with Racing Bulls, we've seen it with Sauber, we've seen it with Williams, and certainly tonight in Singapore, we saw it with Mercedes, and very, very good all-round performance because Kimi Antonelli also drove supremely well to finish ahead of the Ferraris, and it's just outstanding work by Mercedes to do that, and congratulations to them. But I come back to the point, we never really had the motor race that we could have had, because had Max started on the medium, I think it would have been a very different day. Max had other issues. The downshift wasn't that good, but then all the other stuff, he spent about 3 laps, about a third of the way through the race, trying to get the turn in better into turn 13, and as a result played around with the brake bias, and as a result of that had a moment at turn 14, locked up, went straight on as a result of freaking around, I think, with the car too much. And so that was the race, really. The outstanding element of Max's drive to P2 was his resilience under pressure from Lando Norris from about a half distance. After they'd had their pit stops, Lando was on hard tyres that were 6 laps newer than Max's. Max was quick for a while, but then the grip started to go away and all the other factors came into play. And Max could do nothing, really. He was about 2/10 slower than Lando everywhere on a free track on all 3 sectors. Lando caught him easily, but then made no mistakes. Max, after that turn 14 thing, he made absolutely no mistakes at all. Lando, even with the help of DRS, could not get by Max, and in the end kind of gave up and finished third behind him. Lando wasn't in 100% physical condition either. He'd been a bit unwell and he was really feeling the heat towards the end of the race. But a superb drive by Max Verstappen, I thought, under pressure. A good example of captivating Formula One viewing without a lot of overtaking going on. Max's defense just superb. Now I can hear lots of chattering voices out there saying, oh Peter, you're missing the point. It's impossible to overtake around Singapore. I don't buy that. It's impossible to overtake around Singapore. Well, before we judge how difficult it is or not to overtake, bear in mind that some drivers are more aggressive than others. Some drivers are better at overtaking than others. And I don't think we should use Lando Norris's inability to pass Max today as the definitive article. Put another way, if George Russell had been beaten into the first corner by Max Verstappen on soft tyres, having got that grip off the line, I would be willing to bet my house that after about 15 laps, George would have got a run on Max coming out of the 1-2-3, turns 1-2-3 section, where George was really good and where the Red Bull wasn't brilliant. He would have done almost what Fernando did with Hajar, zapped to the left, and he would have got the DRS down into the tight left-hander at the end of that straight, turn 7. Now you may say, oh no, that's impossible. If that was possible, we would have had more overtaking. But this would have been a Red Bull with the soft tyres going off and with George Russell in perfect shape on medium tyres in the Mercedes, in the car as good as it was, and he was really good out of turn 3, the exit of turn 3. And then there's a long straight after that. You're telling me that he wouldn't have been able to get past Max on the toe there? That was the problem. I think everybody went into this race, and a lot of the people who said, oh, wow, Max is on the red tyre, it's worth going for it, because if he gets in front, there's no way George can overtake. I think they completely misread it. George would have got him, even if Max had got the lead, in my opinion, into turn 1 on the soft tyres. So again, I do not understand why they ran those soft. Max would have had a much better chance of taking the race to George, maybe not beating him, had he started on the mediums. Lando and Oscar, 3rd and 4th. Now there's another story, because Oscar Piastri made a very good start from P3 on the grid, from the clean side of the grid, as he would. Lando Norris also made a good start, interestingly enough, from where he was, which was also the clean side of the road. And going into turn 1, from Oscar's point of view, it was right. Max is P2, George is P1, I'm P3, filtering into the corner. And then all of a sudden, on his left, he's got Lando Norris. And he makes a little bit of room for Lando, who then continues down the inside. So he's now effectively on the left of Oscar as they're going through the turn 2, which is the right-hander, and then they're going into the left. And Max is in front now of Lando. And Lando's going a little bit quicker, so he moves the steering to the right to make sure he doesn't hit Max, but actually does catch Max's right rear, and that's what does the damage to Lando's front wing end plate. It just comes out a little bit and then By the end of the main straight, it's flopping to the left quite a lot. But in doing all of that, Oscar then gives Lando more room and gets into an understeer slide and just misses the wall on the outside. And this was, if they were not teammates, you could say, well, this is normal motor racing first lap. But this was teammate stuff between the McLarens. And there was a moment when Oscar gave room to Lando Norris, much as Lando Norris gave room to Oscar Piastri at the start of the Hungarian Grand Prix last year. But that's another story. This one, they're going side by side, and he gives Lando room, and then Lando goes away, having touched wheels with Oscar. There was no damage to either McLaren, or maybe there was to Oscar, because he wasn't very good thereafter. And Oscar then filtered into fourth place, and thereafter drove a very desultory race. And he got on the radio a couple of times to say, is any action going to be taken about this? I don't think he meant by the stewards. I think he meant internally straight away. But the response from Oscar's race engineer, Tom Stallard, was, we're reviewing the situation. And then it came back, the stewards are not taking any further action, Oscar. We'll discuss it internally after the race. To which Oscar got on the radio and said, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. And I totally get it. I think he was quite right to say that, because when you give a teammate room and the teammate then basically runs wide and touches wheels with you because he's misjudged the car in front, the speed of the car in front, and has to avoid Max Verstappen in this case, that is not on. It's not on when it's a teammate. If it's another driver from another team, yeah, but two teammates, it's not on. So under the heading of Zach's master plan, how this is all going to be handled, this was a complete and utter mess. And I don't think they got the best from Oscar Piastri today as a result. And there was a moment when they said, just control the controllables, Oscar. Sounded pretty good. Get on with it. Stop worrying about what happened in the first corner. We'll talk about it later. But I think a lot of the momentum had gone out of Oscar there, and he actually had a big moment, a big-ish moment on that opening lap. You can see where his concentration was. He locked up. He braked a little bit too late into a tight right hander. The back end came out and he ran a bit wide, and all of a sudden Lando was 2 or 3 seconds in front of him, and he kind of looked like he got kind of demoralized after that. Not demoralized, the wind came out of him. Closing laps when Lando was being held up by Max, and Max was doing this great job of defense for P2. Oscar caught them both quite quickly, and they were able to cross the line, P3, P4, to clinch, guess what? The Constructors' Championship for 2025. Not that it was ever in doubt anyway, but yeah, that was the moment, the Singapore Grand Prix, when it was mathematically clinched by McLaren Mercedes. But a bad day for Oscar Piastri and what happened there, having out-qualified Lando. A good day for Lando, you could say. He showed some aggression. But then again, he got alongside Max a couple of times. But this is Max in a relatively lame Red Bull on these older tyres with a few things not quite right. And he couldn't beat him. As I said yesterday, for me, the McLaren Mercedes still the best car. I think the Mercedes right up there today in terms of the window in which they found themselves. But the McLaren Mercedes was as good as that today. And of course, McLaren didn't get the best from it. And they didn't even beat Max Verstappen in a Red Bull. And that shows how much progress Red Bull have made it too, but it also shows how good Mercedes were too, of course. So a lot of controversy over that. And afterwards there were interviews with the top three. There was an interview with Zach Brown. Of course, the one interview you really wanted, and this is where Liberty are missing a trick, just as Bernie used to miss a trick, they fall into this format of the top three. But the guy that you needed to interview as he got out of the car was Oscar Piastri, quite clearly, to get his thoughts, emotions as he got out of the car. By the time the dust had settled, of course, Oscar's a pro and he'll be saying all the right things about McLaren in the first corner. But I bet it isn't like that when they get behind closed doors in the debrief, whenever that's going to be, maybe back in England after this race. And it's an interesting situation, isn't it? Because it's all very well to say, well, Lando's a racer and he went for it and it's good for Lando to have a race like that where he's showing his aggression. But don't forget, there's a Drivers' Championship up for grabs there, and Oscar Piastri's leading at the moment. And so you could say Oscar's a determined, steely guy anyway. And if ever there was a gloves-off moment, this was it. And I think from here on in, there's no way Lando can expect anything at all from Oscar Piastri in terms of teamwork. Obviously, if it's a directive and there's nothing Oscar can do, if he's on a different strategy, something like that, that's a different story. But I'm talking about if they're on equal footing. But to make matters worse, and this is again part of Zach's master plan, I guess we have to see it that way. When they come up to the pit stops, Will Joseph, Lando Norris's engineer, got on the radio to Lando and said, we're thinking about stopping Oscar first so that he can cover Charles Leclerc, who was behind him in the Ferrari. Are you okay with that? And Lando said, yeah. No, I'm not. I want to come in first. what is that? This is the team asking the driver to make the decision on who's going to come in first for the pit stops. Now, I've been covering Formula One, well, for much too long, let's say at least 40 years, probably a lot longer than that. I don't ever remember a driver being asked to make the decision on something like pit stop strategy in the middle of a race. And yet they did that with Lando Norris. Is that part of Zach's master plan? From here on in, it's definitely going to be around Lando, and we want Lando to be the world champion. He's going to make the decisions on the strategy. He's going to make the calls. Is that what it is? And that's what it looked like in Singapore. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And anyway, Lando then did make the first pit stop, and it did work out well. And Oscar, as it happened, came in, and it was a slow pit stop. Now, whether it would have been the same had it been the other way around, I don't know. But it was not a good look either I don't think it was a good look for McLaren to be doing that. That was amazing. They put that out on the radio even. Amazing they even thought about asking Lando's permission for that. Why would they do that? Or approval, however they want to do it. Imagine Ferrari doing that. No, Charles, we're thinking of bringing Lewis in first. What do you think about that? Or Fernando, any of those guys. I mean, they'd say, just get on with it, make the decisions. And I think it showed later in the race when they said I think Tom Sally got on the radio to Oscar and said, we're getting to a safety car window now. Do you think if that happens, you'd come in for a set of softs right at the end? And Oscar said, I don't know, mate. The way things are going, you just make the decisions. And you could tell from the tone of his voice, what he was saying was, I'm fed up. You do what you want to do. And that's not good. Zach's master plan? I guess so, Anyway, congratulations to McLaren for winning the Constructors. They've done a brilliant job. I'd like to take my hat off to Piers Thin, the COO at McLaren, who's the son of Sheridan Thin, with whom I worked so many years at Williams. Piers has done an outstanding job there. Named after Piers Courage, one of Sheridan's greatest friends in the early days. And a big hats off to everybody at McLaren, really, for the job they've done, Rob Marshall and the team there, and how well they've run that car and developed that car and continued the momentum from last year. So very, very good. So Max second, a disappointing second, I think ruined by an absurd tyre strategy, but other glitches in the car, but I think he could have got somewhere near George on this circuit. May not have beaten him, but it would have been close. And the McLaren's third and fourth. And then P5, as I say, Kimi Antonelli drove very well in the other Mercedes, ahead of the two Ferraris. Charles got the jump on Lewis out of the first corner, which would have annoyed Lewis. Lewis then came in for soft tyres, having gone from medium to hard. He then came in for softs right somewhere near the end, did very well on them, got all his positions back and repassed Charles, or got past Charles, but then ran out of brakes before the end and finished behind Charles. So Ferrari were 7th and 8th, not a very good day for them. Charles Leclerc unable to do anything really about Kimi Antonelli. Fernando Alonso, very good drive in the Aston Martin, fiery drive. I think he got on the radio at one point and said, I hope they have a trophy for the hero of the race. This was all to do with the battle he was having at one point with Isaac Hadjar, whose engine was way down on power this race, for 13th place. And Fernando got past and then repassed Isaac coming out of turn 3 with a sort of flick of the steering and a bit of oversteer, and got the run on Isaac, and everybody cheered, wow, Fernando. And from there, Fernando went on to finish 8th in the Aston Martin, looking like Fernando Alonso in a car that is still nothing like as good as it should be at this stage of its development, with Adrian Newey somewhere in the background, presumably offering some advice at some point, but apparently not. Oliver Berman P9 behind Fernando, very good drive. And would you believe Carlos Sainz P10, excellent drive, almost unnoticed, didn't really get a lot of TV time. Both Williams starting from the back of the grid, Alex Albon all over the place, terrible brakes and things like that, but Carlos Sainz just fabulous. P10 from the back of the grid in the Williams Mercedes. If I had to give the drive of the race to anybody, I'd probably give it to Carlos Sainz, I think, for that drive. Isaac was 11th, Yuki Tsunoda. One other thing to say about Isaac, when he was about to be lapped by Max and Lando, his race engineer got on the radio to him and said, just to make sure you're clear about the Max Lando situation, Isaac. And he said, yeah, I'm clear. And we all thought, oh wow, he's going to hold up Lando for Red Bull. There's his Red Bull A drive guaranteed for 2026. But he didn't. He just moved over for both of them. Very wet. Well, I suppose I have to say in a responsible position, I have to say, well, he did the right thing. You're not allowed to impede, but what's a penalty if you can help Max in the situation? Anyway, Maybe I'm too old school for all that stuff. Lance Stroll, yeah, Albon, Lawson, Colapinto, Bortoletto. Yeah, so the race was all up at the front. It was a very intense, difficult race with a lot of political undertones. The strategy calls, the McLaren situation. And through it all, George Russell just took the lead from the start and disappeared, basically, and controlled the race perfectly in the Mercedes. Clinical performance, absolutely superb. I thought it was quite funny after the race, because Lando, of course, bent that left front wing end plate on the McLaren in the first corner incident. But it wasn't the right, it was the left. The right would have been if he'd really touched Oscar Piastri at that, with the front wing, which he didn't. They just bashed wheels. So he did it actually behind Max Verstappen, caught Max's right rear as he was trying to avoid Max, because his closing speed was too much. And afterwards, they're in the green room, and Max says, "Oh, you had broken front wing." And Lando says, yeah, I did that on your car. Something like that. Max says, "Did you? I didn't feel it." Or he'd completely forgotten about it, one of the two. And so that's one thing. And secondly, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Again, we saw it with Charles Leclerc. Where was it? In China, I think, with the front wing. And again here, all the stuff we talk about, the flap adjustment and all the changes from one race to the next. And the front wing end plate is like this. And Lando has the opportunity, I guess, to fit the new nose in the race, but they don't, because it would cost time. And he does the whole race like that. He's the quicker of the two McLarens, no problem at all. So aero department at McLaren, please advise, I suppose. So there we are. Yeah, it was in terms of the championship, this brings it even more, the Drivers' Championship, towards the two McLaren guys. Not that it wasn't anyway. And of course, Lando's closed the gap a little bit to Oscar Piastri. But from here on, it is going to be interesting. Lando, Oscar, lap 1, US Grand Prix, Austin, into the braking area at the end of the straight. Lando gets the toe on Oscar. What's Oscar going to do? He ain't going to let him go, that's for sure. So, yeah, I guess that's a good thing for the rest of the season. We know there's going to be some real racing there as part of, I guess, Zach's master plan. And Max, well, you could sum it up by saying, well, Red Bull, Max Verstappen today could not beat George Russell Mercedes. And that is obviously the result on the face of it. But the reality is, they were on a ridiculous strategy. I don't know what they were I'm still trying to get my head around what they were thinking. The downside of running the soft tyre was so enormous compared with the tiny upside of maybe George making a slow start and Max getting the lead. But if he made a slow start, Max would have got the lead on the medium tyre anyway. So I don't know what they were thinking. There's no way, if George was going to make a reasonable start, there's no way Max was going to pass him into turn 1 with the soft, given the space there was, given the difference between the medium and the soft, and given the relatively short run into turn 1 anyway. I don't know what they were thinking. And that was very sad to see, because from the fans' point of view, it would have been a lot more interesting had Max obviously started on the medium. Anyway, REC watchers, Ayrton Senna. I've mentioned Ayrton a couple of times this weekend in the context of George's pole lap yesterday. And I think we can also say now in the way he ran the race too. Obviously much slower with heavy fuel and all the rest of it. But he was still looking very Ayrton-like in the way he was driving that Mercedes. And Ayrton, of course, drove for Lotus in 1986. John Player Team Lotus, black and gold. The last year the Lotuses were in that colour, actually. 98.4 was his chassis number. It was a turbo Renault powered car. And the alley from the plenum tubes used on that car, made by Team Lotus, the little plenum tubes at the top of the engine, is now part of the DNA of the latest limited edition pre-order REC watch. That is the Ayrton Senna Lotus 98T chassis number 4 watch with that alley in it. And you can pre-order it now in the description below this video. And if you quote the code Peter, you'll get an additional discount as well. So big thanks to REC watches, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja. We'll be back with, I guess, some Cam chat tomorrow. He hasn't been on the phone yet, but Cam usually is. And then some live streams building up to the US Grand Prix. Thanks for watching. See you soon.